kind of do a little introduction here, all right, Bill? We are interviewing William Barlow Quarton III. This is September 17th, 2001. We have Richard Lord Acton, Maurice McDermott, and we'll be interviewing Bill Quarton on the broadcast years. And we're recognizing how important Bill is as a pioneer in the broadcasting world. And we'd like to start on with your broadcast career today, but just for context, if you could kind of begin in New York City, at this pivotal job in New York City, first with the banking business and then as a salesman for Edison's electronic firm. You once said Edison was changing the world and I wanted to be part of it. So if you could build up to that.
Well, when I finished my college education, I thought about places to look for a job, and New York was handy, and I thought there must be a job there somewhere. And so I went to New York and started looking, and was offered a job in South America with the Standard Oil in New Jersey, and my mother had lost one son to the Foreign Service, and she was very objecting to my doing this. So I looked some more and found a job with Thomas Edison. At that time, he was very elderly, but still one of the great world figures, actually. I didn't think that he was very much interested in business, only to get enough money to start thinking about inventing something else. But he had still the part of the business that had to do with the phonograph. That was one of the things that most things like the electric light. A number of people had a part of that. But the recording of the human voice, Edison did it from scratch, and it was scratchy. And he still had what we called the Ediphone. Later, the dictaphone people copied it and were better businessmen, but so I was very happy there, and I finally got to be the office manager, but 2 years had gone by, and while I was happy, I found that the little business that he had left was not going anywhere. He was awfully good to us. He'd have us over at the house and all of that. That was fine, but I finally decided I better look elsewhere. And there were two things I had in mind. The financial business. Banks in those days could, as they just now can again, be in both the industrial banking and the regular commercial banking. But at that time, the Congress decided that wasn't the thing to do, and they insisted that you had to be either in one or the other. And I had switched over to, after Mr. Edison, I had switched over to what is now Citicorp. and they were in, and I was in the industrial banking area. I remember I was in training, and then the government came along and changed the rules on us, so I was looking for a job. But, and I was living across, just outside of, just across the river from Wall Street in Brooklyn, called a place called Columbia Heights, and it was a old-fashioned building filled with a lot of older people, except my roommate and me and two girls who lived there too, and we had taken advantage of the wonderful roof garden that they had. And when we would go up there after the old people had gone to bed, we, looking out over Brooklyn, there were more and more of what looked like clotheslines going up, which turned out to be the first antennas of radio. Well, it looked like a good business, but every young person that I knew was also very interested in radio. And it was tough. I tried to get a job, but it was tough. Well, of all things, my brother, who was 12 years older, ended up running a piece of haywire out here that they called a radio station in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Well, I had gone to school for 1 year at the university and knew about Cedar Rapids, and I knew it was a good town, and this was during long about 1930, 31, and times were tough. And I remembered that Quaker Oats was grinding out their products pretty good, and there was also a very good basis in road machinery to make roads, and so it looked good to me. And I kept writing my brother to see if I could join him, and finally he wired me and gave me an opportunity to come and work there.
Bill, tell us the name of your brother. It's Sumner.
Sumner.
Sumner. And this was 1931.
1931.
Okay,
yeah. So I came out and looked at the community and saw something that really looked good to me. I had been living in New York and the big cities for some time, and I just seemed to like a smaller community. There was that time there had been an originator, the first fella, and I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, that started the first station.
This is the KWCR? No.
He had worked for, with Lee DeForest in World War I. And I think he had, his wife was from here. Anyway, he had started a radio station, and a fellow by the name of Harry Parr was interested in the thing too and would help him as much as he could. And one day they decided that maybe as long as he was interested, they'd build one for him too. So they had two stations. There wasn't any commercial thought to it. But later, this chap decided to go to California, and he sold his radio station to Harry Shaw, who owned the Waterloo Morning Tribune. And it was moved to Waterloo. Well, when I came, the Coles brothers of Des Moines had bought a number of radio stations, thinking that by that time it had some commercial possibilities. And we started to sell a few things. I remember selling a lot of $1 commercials for 1 minute.
A little bit different today.
Yeah, indeed.
Bill, I'm not quite clear. Was this working for the Coles brothers? Were you working for the Coles brothers?
Yes,
Okay.
directly. So was my brother. My brother had married one of the Coles sisters.
Yes, I would like to clarify that too, so that the KWCR, then the WMT...
That was the one they bought.
Okay.
And at that time they had to put 3 stations. There was part of it, that frequency being used in Tumba, and part of it in Boone and here. But they had put that together by the time I came.
I see.
And
And then it was WMT.
yeah.
Okay.
And also the other chap that had moved to California. Gosh, I bought his log, and I wish I had it. You should have it.
Is it, does Rick Plummer have it perhaps?
What?
Does Rick Plummer have that law?
I think he should.
Yes.
I bought it, and it was at WMT
WMT, yes.
for years.
We
But
should have that. I agree with you. We'll have to work together to
well,
get
yeah, there's the original telegram that was Herbert Hoover, who was then Secretary of Commerce, wrote to this chap giving him permission to use the frequency. There was no Federal Radio Commission at that time.
no way.
Yeah. So we got started, and I loved the business. Later on, the station in Waterloo had picked up a very fine frequency.
Yes, tell us the 600.
600. It was strange. In the early days, stations would move to the middle if they could. And there was an engineer that was working down in Memphis, knew apparently more than the newspaper did about radio. And when that newspaper station moved up to the middle of the dial, he grabbed 600 kilocycles real quick. And the same thing with the fellow from Waterloo. He got on that one day without permission and started using it. One time he was in Washington talking to his engineer and the chap, the attorney that did the legal work for him. And he told him about moving to 600 and getting these letters from all over the Middle West. And the attorney said, you did what? And he said, well, we moved. And he said, well, you can't do that. And he said, well, I did, and I'm going to keep it. He said, you keep telling them over there at the Interior Department that we're going to keep it. And he finally got an acceptance on that. So we had 600 kilocycles and moved it back to Cedar Rapids.
Oh, you moved it back to Cedar Rapids.
Yeah.
It's kind of like squatters' rights on this 600 kilocycles, right? I mean, he found this place that he could broadcast all through Iowa and then just stayed
Oh,
on.
my goodness. It was the 600 kilocycles at that time would cover, particularly in the daytime. And so we had something to sell. and did sell it, particularly in the farm field.
Bill, at this stage, were you sales manager for the station, or were you salesman?
I was sales manager at that particular time. Yes.
Wow.
And I loved the business very much. We, from time to time, would have problems, of course, with the legislature about things. And we had finally decided we better set up a permanent Iowa Broadcasting Service to tend to things like the legislature and other programs that covered the whole state. And I became the first president of that. And at that time, this was later, this was long in the late 30s, the National Association of Broadcasters had been formed. And our representative was a chap from Omaha, a friend that turned out to be a friend of mine, and he represented Nebraska, Iowa, and Minnesota on the national board. And all of a sudden it struck me that why don't I try to be something in the broadcasting line. And I visited with him, and he said, well, I'm going to quit, and I'll do my best to give you the stations and give you the votes of stations in Nebraska. Well, I had been president of the Iowa Broadcasting, or was at the time, and Missouri was the other state that we represented, the three states. So I ran for the national board and got elected.
That was in 1943? That was your first term.
Yeah.
That was pretty awesome. That was astounding.
Yeah. So that was my start. And I think back at that time, and all of a sudden it occurred to me that I could go someplace in the industry. And having had my little experience in Washington in school, I went to George Washington there for 4 years and knew how politicians worked. I knew I'd have to be active. You have to do work in the trenches to get up in the world in politics. So I started being active.
Now, in that first term that you served with the National Broadcasting Association, what do you remember as some of the most important policies that you, I guess, developed or achieved? Can you remember that first term?
Well, one of them you'll be surprised at was what we broadcast on the air. What was objectionable and what wasn't. I remember that, and looking back on it, it was pretty tame compared with what they do now.
These would have been sort of voluntary standards, would they, Bill?
As what?
They'd have been voluntary standards, would they, that you set?
Instead of being
mandatory?
Well, they weren't law.
No, there weren't any. But out of that came the Code Review Board, and I got myself on that, and later was chairman one year, and then later in my career, when television came along, much later, I was on that again, working up to having more of an important part in the association, and I still don't really understand it. We had about 2/3 of the television people. Now we're skipping over 2/3 of the television people agreeing voluntarily to have a code and following it. And some of those that wouldn't sign up to do it. I remember Westinghouse, although they wanted to be independent, they followed the code. And this carried on way up to after I had retired. The code boards of both radio and television were very active and successful in holding down the commercials and what was advertised. I remember a great discussion on whether to put on a mind reader or not.
But now that was in '63 and
yeah.
May I be really terrible? Would you mind terribly if we return to radio for a little bit before we get into television? Would
Yeah.
that be all right with you?
Yeah.
We have some questions. For instance, something that you mentioned last time we were here that was wonderful. We want to get on tape. Was what was it like to have live radio? And tell us about the favorite live performances, or some of the mistakes that were made. Or so you mentioned the bands. You mentioned Sunshine Mission broadcast.
Oh, goodness.
The Man in the Street that you started. Toby and Susie and some of the wonderful live bands.
Yes.
Spend some time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, those were the first. we had to. The recordings were terrible, and we really couldn't use them. So in the very early days, we had to do everything live, except we did have a line to New York, and we used those bands that they had us to fill in, and we finally got an association with what we called the Blue Network NBC was the big one with General Cyrano. They had two networks, and the red and the blue. The red had a few more better stations, but we couldn't get that one. Later, the government made them split that. They had too big a piece of the number of stations. So the government suggested that they sell one of them, and they sold the blue, and it became the American Broadcasting Company. This was very interesting to us because our little company, up to that time, Coles had sold us, and we had become the American Broadcasting Company. And when the new owners of the Blue Network checked, they found, for instance, in Delaware, our little company was the American Broadcasting Company. So we made a deal with them, and we became the American Broadcasting Stations, Inc., and they became the American Broadcasting Company.
Start of those major companies.
Bill, could I just ask, the Coles family had sold to you and your brother, or to you?
By that time,
were you on your own, or was your brother?
When the Coles people sold, I was at that time manager.
Yeah.
And I continued under the new ownership as general manager.
But you weren't the owner at that stage.
Beg?
You weren't the owner yourself at that stage. You didn't own it.
Didn't what?
It didn't belong to you.
No, heavens no. I didn't become a part owner until television.
Oh, then the newspapers have got that wrong, as newspapers will. And could we just ask about your brother? Did your brother stay in the radio business with you?
No, he left. He left in 1943.
Was this when Coles sold out?
Well, they didn't sell out until 44.
Ah.
I hesitate to bring this end of the thing.
Please, sorry.
There
no
was
offense meant.
There was a divorce.
Oh, I see.
In 1943.
We have voluntary history central stats.
And my brother decided to go elsewhere, and I became general manager of this operation.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, because that has always been a little bit of a question mark
we
for
both wondered, reading the papers, you know,
what happened
to the brother?
Yeah.
Simple explanation.
Yeah.
Yes, that was a very unfortunate thing. It turned out well for me, but I was deeply disturbed at it because it was it's one of those things.
Yeah, it's very painful.
Sure.
Very painful.
Okay, well, that's fine. That's good. Well, and you were speaking about the origins of these broadcasting stations, and do you mind? The reason I would like to know a little bit about the live radio and television is also, it seems to be just about this time, or is that too late? I mean,
No.
I'd like to go back. Do you mind if we go back maybe just?
Oh, we have to go back. We have to go back to the beginning there.
Mind? Yeah.
Yes, when we needed all the talent we could get in the very early days in 1931. And she had been with a light opera company and spent 2 years in the Orient. And she had put herself through school by working summers for the what do you call them? We used to have. I'm sorry, I can't. Not the opera. They traveled around from city to city in the summertime, and
Toby and Susie, like Toby and Susie.
Well, they used to be part of it.
True. Oh, yeah, it'll come to you. At vaudeville, that's later. Yes.
Yeah, it'll come to me, but it hasn't. But anyway, she was one of the people that performed, and we had a pianist, an organist. We had companies like Josie and Susie. Anything, any entertainment that we could think of. I remember one time of having a group of people that played cornets.
Loud.
And she sang for the radio station.
Yes.
Is that how you met her?
Yes. She would come up and work, actually. Let's see.
Yeah, what was her name?
What?
What was your wife's name before you married her?
Elnora Bierkamp.
Yes, Elnora Bierkamp.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have a question for you. Would you like to take a little bit of a break, you think? And, or would you like to go on?
I'm just going to go on.
All right, fine. Then we'll go on. Okay. Where are we? So you got married in 1935, and where you were going?
Well, I didn't have any money, so we didn't get started very early. And she was running a little flower shop, and I was able to have the man on the street perform in front of her place to get her some publicity without paying for it.
You were already an entrepreneur for her, right?
Yeah.
You got her flower shop on the air.
Yeah. I made a deal with my fellow salesman that he could have the program if he didn't move it from that shop.
And how was that man on the street? Very successful?
It was, yeah. It was one of the first ones, and as a matter of fact, you had to have chills because you couldn't always find people willing to talk. So one of them was a fellow by the name of McElroy, who was assistant manager of the dime store, which was next door. And he was pretty good at it, so we hired him and sent him up to Waterloo. At that time, we had 2 studios. We had moved the main one back here, and but still had studios up there, and so we put him in charge. And then a few years later, after the war, he decided to start a radio station up there.
We did?
Yes.
Your competition?
Yeah.
Gracious.
KWWL.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bill, did radio expand a lot during the Second World War?
Did what?
Did radio expand a lot during World War II? I mean, people presumably were listening.
World War II made radio.
Yeah, well, that's what...
And that's how we met Walter Cronkite after the war. Cronkite had, let's see, the CBS guy in London,
Ed Murrow?
Ed Murrow, tried to hire Cronkite twice, but he was working for United Press, and he didn't seem to quite fit into what Ed Murrow had in mind. Ed Murrow was kind of a showman, and he was good, but a year after the war, let's see, the United Press had sent Cronkite to Moscow, and he came home after the year on a vacation, and my friend that ran the CBS station down in Kansas City called one day, and he said, Bill, the war made radio news. It's over. And we're getting New York, we're getting Washington, but we're not getting any Midwestern news, and I've got an idea. And I said, what is it? And he says, I won't tell you. I'm inviting some of our friends down here, and we'd like to have you come and join them on next Monday. And this fellow was a very fine broadcaster, and I called my friend in Des Moines and asked him what he thought about it. And he said, well, I can travel enough, but I think maybe we ought to go. This fellow's has good ideas. So we went, and it was Cronkite. And the idea was to send Cronkite to Washington and work for these 8 stations. We had, each one of us had, we got all of the Midwestern news that he could bring to us, and then we also had the right to ask him to do 2 specials a month or a week for us. For instance, if Quaker Oats had something doing that interested us, or one of the congressmen or senators, we could call on him. And Cronkite represented us in Washington for 18 months, 2 years. But then he was hired for a special occasion. Maybe there was an inauguration or something, and they heard him in New York. And that was, but he's always been a great friend, and he and I have very similar ideas about how news programs should be. But yes, it's the news presentation now has changed a lot.
Could we go ahead and get into television now? You already are there in a way. And
Yeah.
And especially from your perspective of television today, if you could tell us at the beginning of the experimental period of television, which you were in on, how would you characterize it? What was great about television?
Well, one of the things, of course, unfortunately, the FCC got off to a bad start. The big stations, or the big cities, got stations, but the allocation was not right. And in 1948, they said, "Oh, we're sorry. It's got to stop until we get this thing worked out." So after there was a 5-year period while they were trying to figure out how to allocate the frequencies, we couldn't get on the air. The stations weren't powerful enough. We had one going, I think, down in the Quad Cities, and the university, Iowa State University, had one in Ames, but that was all for the 5-year period, and so there had been quite a little developing. Let's see, there was something that I did in that period.
Let's see, we have for the American Broadcasting Station, let's see, in 1960, Richard, you may want to talk about this because this is about this time, I think, and I may be jumping, maybe the 50s is earlier.
Oh.
Yeah, so, yeah.
What I was thinking of, one of the things that was tough, we had to do our news on film and send out a crew, and they'd film it, and then they'd have to get it back before 5 o'clock, so we could develop the film to use it on the broadcasting, and it was an awful nuisance. And then, of course, just think of what's happened now. They run out with little cameras, and the news guys do it. But
So they do live feeds.
there was another thing too. They came up with the tape that made it so valuable to the television stations that you could run on those machines. I remember the first one we bought was $100,000, and for the station just getting started, it was quite a lump. I remember that.
Where did you buy that for? The Cedar Rapids station?
No, what?
Which station did you buy that?
I was only here at that particular time.
Was it an editing machine or a camera?
It was a machine.
Editing machine, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what year was that, Bill?
1953.
53. Okay. And so now, when did you move into live broadcast and news and television and programming and television? About that time then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were number one in television also, not just radio then?
I never remember at the time when I was manager that it wasn't number one.
Wasn't number one, yeah. I think that's important to know.
Yeah, I'm proud of that.
You should be proud of it. It's extraordinary. And I don't know that of a broadcaster who could say that today. Very difficult.
I'm not going to take part in that now.
Right? No, it's a different world. Well then, tell me if we're skipping over, because the next time that you went national, you were very successful in broadcasting, extremely, and it was the second term of your National Association of Broadcasting in the 1963-64 terms. You were kind of talking about that earlier. Have I skipped too much to go to that?
Well, we were yeah, I was still ambitious at that time, and spent quite a little time with the Code Review Board and other activities that had to do with national television.
National television changed enormously during your term. Could you give us an idea of what was maybe the code review, but there were some major changes in the way broadcasting stations were allocated in? Could you help us? What was the most important part of the broadcasting world that you were involved in during the 60s?
Well, after, as I pointed out, after World War II, the big stations, the big cities had their stations, and fortunately, there was a whole group of very good entertainers, such as Jack Benny and, oh goodness, all of them, Hope and Fibber McGee and Molly, and so many that had been successful on vaudeville, and it was a wonderful group of people to be able to use in getting television started. I still think of that, but we miss them. We don't have them anymore. But they had worked before audiences for years, and they were wonderful entertainers.
Do they come here to Cedar Rapids, or?
Oh, occasionally. They were busy enough. But they did. I remember one time seeing Jack Benny down at the Quad Cities, and so I took a chance and called his manager that I had just happened to know a little bit, and I asked him what he was doing, and he said, well, we can give you 2 performances for about $6,000. And he said, would you have to use the auditorium over at the City Hall? I said, yeah. And he says, those posts still there? And I said, yes. He said, Bill, I don't think our price is kind of price you out of the market, so you better not try it. But every once in a while, what was the guy that the cowboy singer that?
Gene Autry.
Huh?
Gene Autry. Texas.
Yeah, Gene Autry was. I remember him. We had him come one time, and worked out very well. Yeah, he turned out to be a broadcaster too.
Really?
Oh yes, he owned a big station in Los Angeles, and he and a friend of mine in Phoenix. And Gene Autry was really, as a matter of fact, talking to him personally, he would tell you, he says, I'm really not an entertainer, I'm a businessman. And he was a good one. And he ended up owning the national baseball team out there in L.A. and
There's a wonderful museum, the Gene Autry Museum, that's just fabulous. Of his Western collection and his broadcasting, and just fabulous. All the Hollywood stars that he had contracts with in the studio.
Yeah. Well,
now, are there other people now involved? I mean, was Howard Hall or were some other people here in Cedar Rapids involved? Were you on your own nationally? Were you the national representative of the Midwest during this period?
no, you see, there was a big competition for these frequencies, and we'd have to work out combinations so that most frequencies most frequencies were competitive. In other words, we had somebody else that wanted the same one, and we had to fight them. And finally won it.
How did you get into cable? How did it move from these broadcasting companies into cable? Is that how?
Well, in our little company, we covered this back in 1944. We were bought by a very small operation in Washington, D.C. called American Broadcasting Company, and so they, my then boss, I was general manager here, but the company had other stations, Washington, of course, and we owned a radio station in Honolulu. I remember that because very well, because they sent me over there to determine, and I spent about over a month trying to make up my mind whether we should try to build a television station in Honolulu, and it was quite an experience for me. I thought I did the right thing, and I still think it was the right thing, but if I'd have kept him, well, what happened was that we decided to build the television station because there was a good chance of us getting ABC. And so we decided to do it. And we got ABC. But the question was whether we should build it and then sell it or try to keep it. And I was instructed to try to give them an idea whether we should keep it or, well, it was easy. We should build it, but I didn't know whether we should keep it or not. At that particular time, all of the network programs were coming by film a week late, and at that particular time there was a strike on the West Coast with the longshoremen. Our people were not getting their stoves and refrigerators and other stuff to sell, and so I decided maybe we ought to just let somebody else. Well, it wasn't within 10 years, those stations were selling for around $20 million. But at the time, I made the right decision.
Yeah, sure. You made your $20 million elsewhere.
But we had stations. We had a radio station in San Francisco for a while. My then boss was kind of a traitor. We had stations. I remember one in the San Fernando Valley. That was fortunate because we struck oil on the ground, at the ground that the tower was on.
Oh my gosh, it was a real gusher. That's pretty great. What a great visual.
But we weren't a big operation, but it was fun. And he had several newsmen too that he had sold to networks, particularly Mutual. I don't know whether you know about Mutual or not, but it was a rather prominent network back before World War II and during World War II.
Yeah.
We had a fellow by the name of Fulton Lewis who was quite a name at that time. But I had nothing to do with that, getting the talent. I was an operator.
And actually, Richard and I were discussing earlier about books on broadcasting. If you know of books that you feel accurately portray the history of broadcasting, do you know of any that you think, well, that really did tell it like it was? It's a good book on the history of broadcasting. I'm sure they're out there.
Oh my God, there's so many.
You have a good. Well, maybe later you could go in and tell us which one you think is a good book. I mean, that you would recommend from a man on the inside.
This isn't what you're getting at, but it reminded me of a chap by the name of Harry Butcher. Harry comes from a little town out here called Springville, and when I remember Washington, he was a CBS manager of the CBS station, and he was with Eisenhower practically all during the war as a naval representative, and quite famous. But
we should know that. Richard, are you?
Oh, actually, I was there.
Yes.
Bill, there was one thing not, as far as I know, connected with broadcasting that I noticed in your career, which particularly interested me. It's been written by Professor Wiggins that the apportionment of the Iowa General Assembly was the issue that probably generated the greatest political conflict in Iowa. And I saw you were the president of the Citizens Committee for a Constitutional Convention on Reapportionment in 1960. And I wondered how that came about and you know, what your reflections on it were.
My gosh, I'll have to disappoint you. I remember it, of course.
But you don't remember anything about it?
No, I don't.
That's fine.
Well, never mind. I've sprung a bomb on you.
In 1960.
It was an attempt to have a constitutional amendment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And these various voluntary groups, as I understand it, I read an article on it, came together and formed this Citizens Committee to spearhead the movement to have reapportionment so that the towns would get more seats from the country. And you just failed. It was a very close vote. And I wondered how you became president and what your memories of it were, but it's obviously not at the forefront of your mind.
Well, this is very important in Iowa. The apportionment back in 100 years ago
Yeah.
favored, as you can imagine, the small towns. And it's held Iowa back, in my opinion, for years. We're still fighting it. Why do we need 99 counties?
It does.
The road situation is another one. We don't need just got back from a trip from Okoboji, going clear out in the northwest part of the state. Wonderful paved roads out there. You never see anybody for miles. We don't need all those roads, but in the early days, when they used wagons and surreys, they wanted a road around every square mile, and a lot of them have still being used and try to get away from the farmers. I've got a good plan to do it, but I can't sell it.
What's your plan?
Well, it seems to me that at least as a starter, if they would set up a state commission to cut down the roads, and each county has a group picked out to do this, and they're charged to reduce the mileage of country roads X number of percentages each year, at least for 10 years, and see what can be done. And on this committee would be mostly farmers. And see if we couldn't get it done, you know.
But, you know the roads that need to be used.
But when you talk about that to legislators, they don't want to have anything to do with it.
Well, no, I guess really we can wind down now, and the tape will be running out pretty soon. And I guess I know that it's so hard to wrap up your career in broadcasting, and so we may come back, you know, when we reflect upon this. But I guess my question is, how did you decide? At what point did you decide? You know, I've done what I can. I'm gonna sell off, or I'm going to diminish my my companies. How did that happen?
Well, in about 1960, I had been on both boards. I was trying to be get in a position to be chairman of the television board, and did, and was able the next year, 1963 and 64, to well, I was elected chairman of the television committee, and then through political maneuvering, I got to be, the next year, I got to be chairman of the joint boards. And in the meantime, the former boards had selected a new president, a new chap to be president, a paid president. And they picked Roy Collins, who had just finished 12 years as governor of Florida. And so I adopted him to run the thing, and we had quite a time. He knew how to operate politically, and we were having trouble with again some people didn't like the code review board, and he seemed to be on their side, and we had quite a time about that. I've got some material on that.
You do?
Yes.
Some correspondence, or?
No, what the industry said about it. Would you like to see it? I think I could put my hand on it after we get.
Yes, I would like to.
Yeah. This was quite an experience for me. I finally decided that the president and I were on different sides. I wanted to continue it and give the code review boards all of the strength that we could give them, and that wasn't very popular, and the governor knew that, so we had quite a go at that. But maybe there was one thing that he didn't. He didn't think we should sell tobacco advertising. Well, he was right about that, but the time had not come, and our managers around the country took a dim view of that, and that was one of the things we had problems with. But yeah, just for fun, I think I can lay my hands on that.
Well, what was the impact of that struggle? I mean, what happened as a result of? I mean, there were certain strictures, right, on the coterie. I don't know. I would like to see that material because I don't know as much about it as I ought to.
Well, he had a good friend that ran the Times Warner station in Jacksonville. It was on the board, and I got him and two other people and to meet with the governor, and there was I surrounded him with all the power that I could get, and we decided that we'd run it. Yeah, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But Bill, did you really, when you achieved this great feat of being first chairman of the radio and then chairman of the joint
joint board,
was that the stage when you decided you'd reached the pinnacle of your career and that it was time to start winding down?
Yeah, I was.
You only ran about 1,000 cable TV stations after that.
I decided to retire in about 2 or 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I see. Well, very logical.
Yeah, I see. And then you had the cable.
You couldn't go any higher.
Yeah, right. No, that makes sense.
I was retired actually in '67. And I tried to do it in '65. It was a year after that I was joint chairman.
Yeah.
But the situation in my company wasn't such that I could do it. And my senior partner, who was a woman, what did I want to stay on a couple more years? Well, I wanted more winter vacation and extension of my, and I got it all. So
You sure did.
So I stayed on for 2 more years, but I had to answer your question. I had intended to resign or quit in 1995. It didn't. But another, you asked about how we happened to get into cable.
Yes.
Well, our little company was always experimenting, and we had, in the very early days of cable, several cable operations. For instance, how we got into it, we had a radio station in Duluth, and then we decided that we'd try to get a television station. Well, we got a half of one. We had to combine with another chap, and while we were building that station, my manager up there said, you know, there's some people over in Grand Rapids that they have a permit to build a cable system, and they don't know what to do with it. And I said, well, I know what to do with it, and so let's go over and talk to them. Well, we decided that which is a pretty good formula, as a matter of fact. We wanted to control it, but we didn't. We wanted to be fair with them, and they put up their part of the money, and we'd put up ours. We'd build it for them, and it worked out very well. So we tried another one over in the other end of the Iron Range up there. And then we bought one, we got one in Fairfield. It seemed like a good business. But the towers in those days, there wasn't enough coverage. In Grand Rapids, we could only pick up, we couldn't even pick up Minneapolis. And but after we'd retired and we saw what these new high towers were doing with the new improvements in the hardware part of the business, I'd been retired for several years, but it looks so good to me knowing something about it that we decided to do it. And my partner and I knew all the broadcasters in Iowa. We didn't try to make a big thing out of it. We hired a chap from Algona, my hometown, that was, I thought, a good businessman, and he had a little airplane. He'd get around and see the city councils. You know, they can be an awful nuisance so we got back into it. We knew everybody in Iowa. I mean, they would come to us and say, look, how do you get in the cable business? And we'd say, well, you get the license, we'll put you in the cable business. And all we insisted was that we would control it. And that worked, oddly enough.
What was the name of that company?
What?
What was the name of that company?
Cable Communications of Iowa.
Okay. Did you have one here in Cedar Rapids or
No.
Elsewhere, yeah.
No, we didn't.
Was that Fort Dodge, Bill? Was it Fort Dodge company?
We owned a piece of that, but we didn't like our partners.
Keep asking you
and
discreet questions.
And we sold it, and used that money we had looked and hoped to get Burlington, which is a nice little town down on the river. And we did get it, and we used that money. That's another story where I missed a fortune.
Another missed fortune.
This hasn't anything to do with broadcasting, but see, McLeod was a teacher, and then he came to I think Lou Van Austin hired him, and we were building down in Burlington, and he came up to the station one day and offered me some stock, and we had the money that came out of Fort Dodge, but at that particular time, this was during the Carter administration, and we were paying 18% interest at the bank. They actually wanted more than that. And so I decided we better keep that money instead of putting it into McLeod stock, because all of us were getting to the age where we were going to retire. That same stock was picked up by the Iowa Electric Light and Power Company, and 3.5 years later, it was sold for just over $100 million.
Oh, well.
Blame President Carter.
Blame. Well, he actually,
Yeah.
we were talking about the code review boards and what we were trying to do to control the radio and television operations. During the Carter administration, and I never could understand this. I'd retired long since. The Justice Department decided that we couldn't do this. It was voluntary. And they said, no, the law says that the manager is the one that decides what is going to be on that station. He's responsible. You can't tell him what to do.
So it's really, wow, standards have just dropped now. When was that? That was the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Bill, we're just about out of tape. No, we're not. But, no kidding. Oh my God, I must be looking at this wrong. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I guess we didn't. Our next question then is that here you are, you've been a very successful man in broadcasting and cable, and you got into the stock market, we understand, and the next thing we have about you in our research is that you are a philanthropist, and recently very involved in the Greater Cedar Rapids Community Foundation, but also very concerned in a positive way about Cedar Rapids, and one of the leaders in decision-making in Cedar Rapids. And I wonder if you could comment on that, on what you think about Cedar Rapids as a place. You're still here, and what's the future? How do we ensure our civic, you call it civic rent in one of the quotes we, what do you, because I know this is important to you.
Well, when I came here, it wasn't very long until I decided that what I should do is be a part of the community. That would make it much easier for me to sell radio. And so a group of us decided to have what is now the Junior Chamber of Commerce. And our senior chambers wasn't quite sure whether they should encourage us or not, but we did go ahead and formed what was called the Young Men's Bureau. And the first president was a chap by the name of Robert Bickle. And Bob was the one that came up with the pay your civic rent idea. And we would work on things like, at the time, I say at the time, it's still the same management or the same system that we use to run Cedar Rapids. This is a very unusual system. I don't think now there are any other cities in the country that have the same setup. And I remember one of the first programs that we had, we were assigned the task of deciding, this committee, what was the best system to run a city. And after giving it great thought, we decided that there wasn't any one system to run a city. It depended on who these people were, and that you shouldn't make any changes in government unless there was a reason, a very disturbing reason to make it. Well, there's never been one, and we're still running the same system, and we're getting along fine.
Well, we're talking about the commission form of government.
So we were interested to the extent that, let's see, the fellow that followed Bob Bickle became president of the Chamber of Commerce, and I was the number 3 president of the Junior Chamber, and I was president of the Senior Chamber in 1944, and it was, I guess that's where I learned you had to do a little work. I was on the retail merchants committee that is interested in downtown Cedar Rapids, and I guess that's why I got into as chairman of the National Association of Broadcasters. I was quite young at the time. I was 31 or something. I forgot. Well, let me figure it out. Well, anyway, it was younger than most of them.
You're 31. Yeah. It's pretty. You were a junior member of the senior chamber then. You were president. That is quite remarkable.
In 44, I was president.
But you were also a national figure at this time too. So.
No.
Was that before?
I just learned. I was just learning.
Ah.
I had.
Was that when you were in the radio broadcasters, and was that 43, 44? It's about the same period.
Mm-hmm.
You were riding high in both your local community and the national.
Yeah. Well, I decided I could maybe get someplace.
Well, if I may ask, nothing to do with your private life or your family, what looking back on your incredibly varied and successful career, what gives you most satisfaction? Or what are you most proud of that you've done? If that's not an unfair question, because I know you're very reticent about these matters.
No, I think I think the industry thing, I was I had a lot of fun and got a lot of experience by being on the CBS advisory board, CBS television advisory board. It was kind of a joke among us. We were advising CBS what to do, but they had to listen to us, you know, because we were their representatives in the territory.
Was this when Bill Paley was there, or not quite yet, or?
Oh yes, you bet he was. He ran it. You bet.
Really brilliant broadcaster.
We were mostly operators, and so I worked with Frank Stanton a lot more than I did with Bill Paley. Bill Paley, though, handled the talent, and boy, was he good at it. I remember when Lucy would get sick and tired of Hollywood and want to resign, and we'd talk Bill Paley to go back to Hollywood and talking her out of it. And he did it twice, but then it didn't work anymore.
She bailed, yeah.
But Frank Stanton
he was
the businessman, and I had great respect for him. He built a wonderful building there they called Black Rock in New York, and they were a good team, wonderful team. But that was all part of
the things you did. The things you did nationally in the broadcasting industry.
Yeah. I was on when I was on the Board of Regents, started in 67, 74, I think. I was only on there 6 years. Iowa started the Public Broadcasting Network, and the setup at that time was that 3 of the Board of Regents were members of this committee, and 3 members that the governor appointed, and 3 members that came from the other schools. And you get on committees of 9 people, and you really can't get much done. But I was the only broadcaster that knew a damn thing about it. We were trying to build a statewide network, and we did it. We got the university to give us Channel 12, and we got the school board in Des Moines to give us Channel 11, and these were VHFs, and that gave us a start.
So this is the public broadcast. This is
and then we had to go to UHFs and spread them around the state, and that first 10 years of the Iowa Public Broadcasting Network were fun. And then it was, as a matter of fact, it was so interesting that I got them to appoint me to the national board after I'd retired. I used to preach my people at the manager type that were resigning. I said, I see that you're gonna resign or retire in a couple of years, and I'd always call them in and and try to get them to think ahead and figure out something that they should do that's of interest to them. And I remember I had one engineer, and I gave him this speech, and I said, what can you think of something you'd like to do? He says, I don't want to do a damn thing but sit. Well, he was hopeless, but usually so. I tried to take my own advice, and I got on the National Public Broadcasting Board for 4 years.
And, I don't know that. I wasn't in your. When was that, Bill?
74 to.
Oh my gosh.
Bill, you need to do more work on your Who's Who entry.
Yes, that's not on here. Well, so, I mean, this is really extraordinary because
74 to 78.
it's just astounding.
Well, that's the tail end.
It isn't.
So really, you are the beginnings of electronic. I mean, really, with Edison, you were the beginnings of recording. You're the beginnings. You were on the stage in the beginnings of radio, and then you went national right away, right? You started and built it up locally here at WT. And then
Yeah, by that time there was.
Well, wait, and then you worked on television and established the television stations here, and then in the 60s you went national. Then cable, right? And you established a cable network in Iowa. Now you get on the Board of Regents and you help to establish the public broadcasting in Iowa, and then you go national. This is an extraordinary feat that you have done time and time again as an entrepreneur, is to establish different kinds of broadcasting systems and then take your ideas national. I mean, this is really, as Richard said earlier, no humbleness allowed, Bill. This
No,
is
humility is ours.
extraordinary life, and we're so impressed.
I think
Well, that was fun.
I love the way you use the word fun, because I think you have fun whatever you do. I think you have fun whether I'm talking of you as an individual. I think you have fun whether you're visiting with people, or you have fun when you're working incredibly hard, or you have fun when you're building something, or pioneering something,
Oh,
or
yeah.
making a great deal of money. You have fun all the time. I don't know about that, but I'm sure. You were quoted as saying that the biggest lessons you've learned in life was the value of patience and using to good advantage what you've learned in life. Well, the second you've demonstrated in your discussion with us this morning, because as Maurice has said, you've actually used the same pattern again and again and again. Get in as a pioneer in the new communication thing, develop it, work at it commercially, and then go national. And you've done that about 5 times. But I'm interested about patience, because whereas you speak slowly and carefully and thoughtfully and deliberately, I'm surprised that you're patient. I would have thought you were a person who would say, if there are 9 people on a committee, you can't get anything done.
Well,
In other words, I have to do it all because I'm the only broadcasting person.
well, that was fun because
No, but
We had-
perhaps I'm not meaning to tease, Bill. I'm sure you are a very patient man.
yes,
But do you mean
I learned to
timing
be.
rather than patient?
I learned that.
You
It
learned
wasn't
patience.
easy either.
Yeah, I bet. No,
Uh-huh.
because you
So
have
your
this idea.
nature is not patient, but you learnt the need for patience.
Yeah, I think there's a good CEOs should have that. I see some of these people now that are running stations and wonder how they do it. But
They are not patient, no. Patience is not a feature you find in broadcasting today.
My father, who you would have had fun with, used to say, I like those slow Yanks.
Well, my
Want to talk slowly.
my father was a district judge, and I guess I get some of that from him.
Yeah.
That would be a good role model to have a judge as a father. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, his story is interesting. He'd hold court in these county seats, these towns, these certain.
So he was a circuit judge?
Hmm?
Go ahead. Was he a circuit judge then? Or?
What?
Was that a circuit judge or?
Circuit judge.
Yeah, I should.
Yeah, I mean they go to different counties,
Yeah.
like our judges go to Cedar, and I don't know. But he could get. This is back 100 years ago. He could get to his counties in Emmitsburg and Esterville and around. But there was one county that didn't have a railroad, and he'd have to take his horse or take the buggy
Okay.
and go down there, and he got a little tired of that.
That's a wonderful link with history. What year would he have been born, Bill?
1903.
What year would your father have been born?
Been born?
Yeah.
1858.
That's pretty good.
Now wait a minute. Oh no.
No, because then he would have been
No.
No, that's right.
45.
No, that's right. He was born in 1858 and my mother in 1863.
60. Yeah, you were the youngest, or the.
Oh, we were strung out over 15 years. Yeah, my older brother, the one in the Foreign Service, was 15 years older. Then my brother Sumner was a couple of years younger than that.
He's a lawyer also.
Then I had two sisters, and then 5 years after that, I came along.
Have you traced your genealogy, Bill? I saw a reference to you being a Norman. It's a Norman name, you think, originally, Quarton. You came with the Conqueror.
Yeah, the Q.
Conquered us Anglo-Saxons.
The Q was I think it came from there.
I think I've never heard the name. Is it?
But most of them that went to England, you know, England up until, well, there was a period in there in John's regime, for instance. Let's see. Who preceded him?
King John?
Huh?
Preceded who? King John?
Yeah. Who
Richard
preceded?
Coeur de Lion.
Richard?
Richard the Lionheart.
Yeah, he was the one that, yeah. He, because I remember this a long time ago. He broke the treasury on the crusade.
That's right.
And I think when John came along, I think they lost Normandy.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of people who came. I don't know. We've got there's a Quarton in the Louvre. I had Jean look it up when she was over there. Yeah, it goes back to the 15th century though.
Very interesting. Your cousin.
Enguerrand, I think it was his name. Enguerrand Quarton.
That's fascinating. Have you ever heard of him?
But most of them changed to, like, Quessington became Washington.
Sort of anglicizing it.
Yeah, and most of the Quartons became Fortons, W.H.
Oh, that's
Our our people never got around to it.
They became Wharton.
What?
They became Wharton.
W.H.
Oh, right,
Oh,
because
that's
Lady
why.
Lady Wharton was a great, who died, I'm sorry to tell you, of CJD, was a great friend of mine, and they were a very prominent family, so they would have been the same family as you. She was lovely, photographer.
Well, that's very interesting.
Isn't it interesting?
Yeah.
This Sumner was visiting in France one time, and he said the only one he ever found was a Quarton and ran a meat market. They had a head of a bull out in front of it on the.
Oh, with the court.
Yeah.
No, is your brother passed away then? Or something?
No, he was accidentally killed. They had the government has have a lot of ships, but these particular ships are used when the government really needs them, and they're pretty fancy. Working ships. They aren't passenger ships, but they have some nice accommodations for about 15 or 20 people. And they'd had a wonderful trip on one of them, and they were taking another one. And the sea was rough. And if it had been at night, I thought he'd probably been drinking too much, but it was first thing in the morning. He was going up for breakfast. Pitched back on his head, and there wasn't no doctors aboard, you know. So, but the rest of us lived a long time.
You've done so much with your life, Bill. It makes me feel very humble. Oh, that's not a question, is it? And you did College and St. Luke's,
The Hoover Museum.
the Hoover Museum. You've been on endless boards, haven't you?
You've been on many boards, the Hoover Museum and St. Luke's and College, and you've served on many foundations and boards.
Yeah, I thought it was the thing for broadcasters to do, to encourage them to take part in the community. And I think that that's slipping away, and it's too damn bad. They don't seem to take the interest they did.
The broadcasting community.
Yes, I don't think that they're
not rooted.
You're one of maybe 100 stations.
Right, exactly.
What interest do you have in the community?
Right.
In my day, it got up to 7, and the government said, "Hey, that's enough." And for a long time, the most stations you could have were 7. Now you can.
Hundreds.
Yeah.
Well, like Mary Quast bought 400 in like 3 weeks. Remember when Mary Quast bought all the radio stations, not television, but television, you can own hundreds. And they, now that they buy them and then a month later sell them, so that the ownership is not stable. It's very difficult to be involved in a community when you don't have the stability of ownership.
Well, this is my idea of broadcasting.
Yeah.
I think that it's too bad that got away from the communities.
Yes.
Some of it's still there, but...
Well, here it's so unusual. The Gazette Company, I think, is very unusual because you have the Ladkey family, and Joe Ladkey, they still have to have family owners. It's a very unusual thing, and Cedar Rapids still has that. But in the news business, not in broadcasting.
Well, I'm going to give you that
Thank you.
thing on...
Here, let's unhook you, Bill.